Okay, let's begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. We've been looking in the Gospel of Luke at what I'm calling stories of faith. These are stories that we find only in the Gospel of Luke. And we kind of pretend we can have some conversation with him and ask him a few questions about which ones are his favorite, why did he pick this, how did that work. In every case, there is always this collection of characteristics that make up what, at least I think, St. Luke means when he talks about faith. I've repeated this probably 10 times. So if you only remember one thing from the whole week, this might be the one thing. Hopefully you can remember two, but you know. The elements, of course, are stories of faith involve risk. Stories in faith involve boldness, involve confidence, empowerment, and transformation. Maybe not every story of faith has every item, but pretty much so. Yesterday we saw a story about a woman that everybody said was a sinner, and she kind of crashed poor old Simon the Pharisee's dinner party, and we saw what kind of a consternation that was. We all knew who she was, or at least what she was, and we were aggravated that she chose to break into that dinner party. We thought she knew who Jesus was. She went right over to him like she knew him. And then she did some other things that just about made us throw up. You know, she took her hair, which was already hanging down, wiped his feet. She was crying, anointed him, and kissed him. About that time we were ready to leave. But then again, as with many of these stories of faith, there's a twist. Generally, there's a twist toward the end, and the twist toward the end is very important because it generally shows us how we have misunderstood the whole story. And once you start listening and reading these stories, you begin to see. Now, if Jesus really told these stories, and I certainly believe he told stories like this, if not exactly these stories, you can see that eventually he's going to get in trouble because the religious officials and the secular officials are not going to put up with much of what he has to say. And of course we know that ultimately, if you'd ask the question, why did Jesus get killed factually? The answer is because of what he said. He didn't do much other than talk. He walked around maybe a little bit, 65 miles east and west, 125 north and south. So he did walk, and he healed people, but lots of folks could do that. That wouldn't make him any special because he was a healer. But the way he talked, the things he said, he took kind of traditional ideas that everybody thought they knew what they meant, and all of a sudden he turns them upside down and say, you know, this might not really be what that meant. Which is interesting because if you want to be a follower of Jesus, one of the things that a follower of Jesus does is to talk like Jesus talked. But when we discover, well, you know, that could be a little dangerous, then it makes being a disciple that more challenging. If we could ask Luke again, okay, we liked that story yesterday, kind of, some did. What else? You got any others that you liked that we ought to know about? I think he might say, well, I can tell you the one that has become the most popular. It was in my day anyway, the most popular, and still is. It's got a title that people give it. It's not the title that the gospel itself gives it, but most people know the story as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, Luke might say, and there's a real reason why I like this a lot. And the reason I like it a lot is because it's so misunderstood. Even from the beginning, it's misunderstood. Even the title, Luke might tell us, is misunderstood. Well, we might say, why did you tell the story? Why is this such a favorite of yours? Well, he says, maybe, I got a mixed community here. Most of my people are Gentiles, which means that they know a lot about secularity. They know a lot about Greek thinking and all of that. But unlike a Hebrew audience, unlike Israelites, they don't know much about Old Testament things, about Jewish theology, spirituality. So I have to teach them. One of the issues in the community itself is that of neighborliness, believe it or not. We don't agree on what it means to be a neighbor. Some say, in a very narrow sense, I'll tell you what a neighbor is. A neighbor is a person who lives next to me. That's my neighbor. Others would say, well, I'll go further than that. My neighbor is the person who lives next to me, but all my relatives, I would consider my relatives my neighbors also. Well, what about people who don't live right next door? No, they're not my neighbor. What about people who don't think like you do? Do neighbors all think alike? Oh, absolutely. That's what makes them neighbors. They think alike. If they could, they'd look alike. They do things alike. And they like one another. That's why they're neighbors. Well, what if you're not in that group? Then you're not a neighbor. Stay out. Luke says that is not anything Jesus would approve of. It's not the way he taught. Then he might tell us, but I found this story. Among all the many stories that have been going around, somebody pointed it out to me. Here's a story that he thought or she thought I might be able to use to exemplify the idea of what a neighbor is. So I got a hold of that story, and I think it might work. I think it might work. I'm going to set the stage for the story, Luke would say. So the first part of this story actually is from St. Luke, not from Jesus. And he'll tell you when Jesus chimes in, when he's really holding the story right in his hand. So here's how Luke starts out. This is in chapter 10, if you're looking at Luke. Starts at verse 25. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Well, already we know we're in a mess. Not because it's a lawyer, but that might be true. This is a test. Now, here's the thing that people don't quite understand, and it doesn't make a lot of sense even when you explain it. Many of these tests were verbal battles that people in this culture of honor and shame would engage in. It was a way of upmanship. I know that you think you're pretty smart, but I'm going to start asking you some questions, or I'm going to confront you in a way that you're going to look like a fool. And when I can get you to look like a fool, that'll shame you, and that'll mean that you know that I'm better and bigger and smarter and all of that. Now, if you know how this trickery works, how this testing works, as soon as you are asked a question, and generally they The theory is you ask a question real simple to get the person caught off guard, and they'll blurt out the answer because it's so simple, and then you have them, then you can really go after them. So Jesus is a master at this sort of verbal battles. The lawyer apparently didn't know that. But so he's out to somehow disprove Jesus. So just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said. Well, we know that he doesn't care about the teacher stuff. He's just buttering him up. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Well, that's like Catechism 101. Why does God make you? God made me to love me. I don't know, we know that by heart. Even if you never studied the Catechism, you still probably know that part. Eternal life. So, simple question. Here's Jesus' response. He said to him, "What is written in the law?" One question. "What do you read there?" Two questions. So he didn't give any answers at all. He asked two questions, so it's 2-1. Jesus is ahead. Now, Jesus has now asked this guy a question. Now, if he's smart, he won't answer it. He'll reply with another question. But he's a lawyer. "What do you read there?" He answered, because it's so simple. You just blurt it out without thinking. "You love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Remember, Luke is interested in neighbor. But of course, what has happened here is the lawyer has lost. Jesus has been the one who has persevered. And Jesus said to him, now here, if you really were going to play the game right, this is where you would put that opponent up against the wall and tell him what you really think of him, you know, that how stupid he was. He should have never come after you in the first place, and don't ever see this. Don't ever do it again. If you ever see me on the street, walk on the other side. That's how I would do it. But Jesus has a different attitude and a different way of doing things. And Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." This guy has gotten off scot-free. Jesus has just really let him go without making him pay anything. Now, if he was smart, and so far he hasn't shown that he is, if he's smart, he'd just get out of there. He might even thank Jesus and assure him, "Don't worry, I'll never see you again." But he doesn't. But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now that's what Luke likes. He puts that there. So now Luke has set the stage. Now he reaches in and he's got this story. Now we got to remember, if you'd ask Luke, as he's showing us this story he has, if you'd say, well, do you know why Jesus told this story? He'd say, no. Do you know what the situation was that caused him to talk like this? No. Do you care? Not really. I know how I'm going to use it, and how I'm going to use it. Well, that's the way it works. That's how the catechism before me. This might have gone through 3 or 4 stages already before I got my little copy. But I'm going to use it. I think it might work. So we'll see. So now Luke reads the story to us. This is the story that Jesus told. Sometimes what you discover is the evangelist does not really know how radical some of these stories that Jesus told really were. And sometimes Jesus is far more challenging than the evangelist would be. And this happens several times in Luke. So, but wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, so here's our story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, went away, leaving him half dead. That's pretty realistic. If you go on a tour of the Holy Land, they'll show you that road. You can't go on it anymore, it's closed, but you can see enough. You can see that that's a curvy road. Everybody would have said, that you would never be on that road at night by yourself. That's just inviting trouble. You wouldn't even be on it during the day most of the time. And if we would have heard rumors or information, another person got mugged on that Jerusalem-Jericho road, well, that wouldn't shock us. We wouldn't necessarily like it, but we would say, well, you pay your money, you take your chance. That's the way it is. This was particularly a severe mugging. Normally, when you would do a mugging, you would beat the person up a little bit, and you'd steal off whatever they wanted, leave them there, and then you head out. The added feature here that ordinarily wouldn't take place is they stripped him. So they stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Doesn't say which half, but the important point is he's half alive, so he's probably conscious. But you see, now he has no clothes. Clothes were your credit card identifications, When anybody wants to know who we are, you just give them one of those cards. But in those days, you could identify people by their clothing. So you could tell a Jerusalem priest, you could tell this, you could tell. And that was very important, because if somebody was injured or harmed, you wouldn't necessarily be obligated to do something to help them unless they were part of your group. And the way they would know, or you would know they were part of your group, oftentimes was by what they were wearing. And so if you've got no identification, then theoretically no one will make a claim to wanting to help you. They don't know who you are. And so that makes it all the more precarious. So this guy has no clothes, he's only half alive, and one of the things now you have to keep in mind that most people miss, if you're going to make a movie, let's say, of this story, one of the first issue would be, where do you put the camera? A movie is a camera telling you a story. A director is a person who knows how to use the camera to tell you the best story. The best movies and best directors are the ones who know how to do this the best. And so the early question is always, where do I put the camera? Who is really the subject matter of this story? That's who I got to figure out belongs to the camera. Right off the top of their head, most people say, well, that's a Good Samaritan. He's the main character here, but he isn't. The main character here is this guy who is now laying along the side of the road here, half dead. Everything we see and hear from now on are going to come through him. So he has to have the camera on him, and everything we're going to see comes from his perspective. Which means this is not a story about a Good Samaritan. This is a story about a Jewish man who's been mugged along the Jerusalem-Jericho road and is laying there half dead. Well, what about the Good Samaritan? He's a character, just like the innkeeper is a character. He's an important character, but this is not his story. This is the story of somebody else. This is where the story gets oftentimes misunderstood from the very beginning. What story is this? So, now by chance. So this is not on purpose, this is just happenstance. So now by chance, a priest was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So our camera could see him. Remember, we're half alive, half dead. So as you can tell what a priest looks like, you can tell by his clothes what he is, Jerusalem priest. So he's starting to come our way, and then all of a sudden you can see he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop for us anyway. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Well, what are we to think of that? A lot of commentators beat up on these two guys. They show them how stupid and useless they are, that they wouldn't help their own person. Well, they don't know it's their own person. There's all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't help just somebody that you can't even see. You don't know how bad they are or anything like that. The law says, and you would know the law says if you find a corpse dead along the side of the road and you're a Jew and it's a Jew, you are obligated to bury it. That's the law. That's a major issue because you didn't have a backhoe in those days, so you had to dig a grave. In digging a grave, then you had to put the corpse in the grave. This means you had to touch the corpse, which was the most severe form of impurity you could encounter. You would be doing sacrifices for a week or two and be out of commission until you got back into the state of ritual purity. So you're not going to just rush up to anything you see along the side of the road and offer help until you know for sure it's one of yours, they need help, and you're the one who can provide it. So if we were listening to this story, if we were in the audience and listening to what Jesus was saying, there'd be two kinds of people here. There would be the groupies of Jesus, the lowlife, the lepers, the prostitutes, the tax collectors. They would be there. And when they saw this priest and Levite coming, and then they saw how he veered off, neither one going to help, they'd like that. That audience, they'd giggle and chuckle and say, well, priests and Levite, they don't help people. What would you expect? They're not going to do anything. If you were a scribe or a Pharisee in the audience, you might say, well, there's reasons for this. We might be. Either way, everybody who would be listening to this story would know what kind of story it is technically. And technically, this is what is called a series of three stories. It's the kind of methodology you use for oral tradition. You don't have any text in front of you, so you can't turn the page back and remember what it said. So if I'm telling you a story and I have something important that I want you to pay attention to, I will do what they call put a hook in the story. A hook is some kind of indication that the next sentence is going to be important. Pay attention. In a series of three, the way this would work is you would know there's going to be two possible solutions and neither one will work. These two solutions can be used to build up the drama, build up the character, but whatever it is, neither one is going to work. This is to set you up for the third solution. The third solution is going to be the real one. We all know this. So we've been warned by the text itself. We watched the first guy go by, we watched the second guy go by, and that's okay. We give us a chance to ridicule the priest and the temple because most of the lowlife, Jesus' groupies, we don't get anything from the temple anyway except higher taxes, and our assessments are always up. We think the temple is run by a bunch of crooked priests who only serve themselves. So we'd laugh. This would be our chance to be anti-clerical. We'd laugh at them. Even though the scribes and the Pharisees would say, well, you're overstating the case. There could be good reasons for all this. Nonetheless, we're all waiting to see who's going to be this third person or this third solution. If you're one of Jesus' groupies, you're hoping maybe he'll say, and a leper was walking down that road and saw this guy and rushed up and helped him, and we'd all clap and yay. Or if you're the scribe and Pharisee, you're hoping against hope that, he might say, and a good solid Pharisee came up and saw him and rushed over and all the rest. And Jesus knows how this works. He's telling a story, so he knows how a series of three works. So, here's what he says. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him. And when he saw him, he was moved with pity. Now, if you could get the camera to turn around and look at the audience, once you've heard this, you'd notice this might be the closest they've ever come to agreement. And everybody in the audience would be suffering from the same kind of shock. The same kind of shock would be, I can't believe Jesus said that S word. I can't believe that he said a Samaritan would help anybody. Now see, that doesn't work for us. This is the crux of the story, and it doesn't work for us because we like Samaritans. We think Samaritans are good people. If I said to you all, I don't know, but you all seem to me to be pretty good Samaritans. You might not know why I said that, but you wouldn't walk out storming. You hear what he said to us, who does he think he is telling us we're good Samaritans? Nobody would do that. You might say, I don't know why he said that to me, but I'll take it. Anybody want to call me a good Samaritan, fine. We name hospitals after them, Good Samaritan hospitals. We have laws in my country anyway, where I live. Samaritan laws, highway laws. If somebody runs over me with a car and somebody else stops and drags me off to the side of the road, I can't immediately call my lawyer and sue him because we have Good Samaritan laws. But you see, in the culture in which Jesus lived, everybody that Jesus would hobnob with hated Samaritans. They'd been hated since the year 721. They had been hated because they were considered to be people who never had to undergo the exile. They were considered people who changed some portions of the Torah. They were hated because they didn't believe in Jewish oral tradition. There was nothing good about a Samaritan. So if we would want to hear this story as it would have been heard at the time of Jesus, we can't use the word Samaritan because we still are all going to have a pretty good idea, a good viewpoint of what a Samaritan is. But if you put some people there, you need to insert, in place of the Samaritan, you'd have to put somebody that you hate. To which I know we're all going to say, well, I don't hate anybody. Yes, you do. So do I, sad to say. And there's people that, if I'd tell you this story and I said, and an old man who owned 15 abortion clinics, all of them packed full every day, came down that, I wouldn't even get to the end of that sentence before people start to get up and say, I don't want to hear that. Those people don't help anybody, Well, there's other folks similar to those kinds of people that we hate, and we couldn't imagine they would help anybody. But for this story to work, you have to have your own Samaritan-esque person in there, the person that you would not imagine anybody having mercy on or pity on. But a Samaritan, while traveling, another thing we'd wonder if we were down there is, how did that guy get this far south and nobody killed him? That'd be our main question. A Samaritan shouldn't be down here, this place. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him. And when he saw him, he was moved with pity. A Samaritan moved with pity over a Jew laying half dead along the side of the road. Unbelievable. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. A Samaritan doing this to a Jew. Can you imagine? No. Next day, he took out 2 denarii, 2 full days' wages, a lot of money, gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. This is way over the top. The audience just would be shaking their heads. Couldn't imagine Jesus actually saying this. Because remember, Jesus is a Jew. I will repay you whatever more you spend. That's the end of the story, as Luke has it. Now, Luke's going to chime in. We can argue whether we think he understood the story correctly or not. Which of these three, Jesus says, or Luke says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. Notice the lawyer won't even say the S word. You won't say it. You just, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus says, go and do likewise. Now that doesn't sound harsh, but if you were that Samaritan, or if you were in this audience here, that would sound terrible. You're telling this guy, go become like a Samaritan. Be like the person you hate most in all the world. So most of the time, this story is interpreted as a feel-good, do-good story. Many preachers, after they've read you this story, told this story, they are of the impression that the real main character is the Good Samaritan. That's what he is. He's good. He helped a Jew. The moral of the story is supposed to be, you too should be a Good Samaritan. And that means wherever you find somebody in need, that's sacred time. Any place you find them in need, that's sacred place. And so you too should go and be a Good Samaritan. Now, I don't have any problem with that idea, being a Good Samaritan, helping people, that's good. But is that really what this story said? Who's the main character of the story, remember? The man who is in the side of the road here, half dead. And what is it about him? He has no control over who can help him and who can't. When that guy looked up and he saw that Samaritan coming down the road there toward him, probably the first thought he had was, I hope I die before he gets here. Because you would want anything other than him touching you. But here's the catch. You can't do anything about it. I think what Jesus is saying is, here's an issue about who controls the avenues of grace. Who decides who it is that God can work through? Who decides what those avenues of grace are? Who is capable of saying, well, this is God's will because God works through these people, but this isn't? We would almost automatically say, if you were a nice, healthy person, like this nice Samaritan, well, okay, God can work through you. But if the story was told in our character, okay, here's this guy who owns all these abortion clinics and keeps them running 24 hours a day. Could he be an avenue of grace? Could God ever, under any circumstances, use that kind of a person to communicate grace? Most people would say no, because most people would think somehow or other we determine that. We determine how that all works. Jesus says, you don't. How much do we not determine? Well, it could be as bad as, and then he told this story, as this Samaritan, as this Jew. And remember, when it comes to avenues of grace, we're all half dead. We think we control it. We think God knows what we want, and that's how we get it. God knows what we want is good. And what other people who don't think like us, act like us, look like us, they don't want that. They're bad. We know that. That's how we live most of our, that's what's going on in the world today, good and bad. and it's all getting pretty corrupt, but nonetheless, that stuff still goes on. Avenues of grace. And then the kicker, I think, would be, who does that person who is laying there along the side of the ditch? Who is that? Who does he represent? To which I think, that's us. That's what Jesus is saying. You want to know who the main character in the side of the story is? It's that guy laying there on the side of the road, and that's you. Because in the eyes of God, you don't determine how grace works. Oh, God will help you, but not on your demand, and perhaps, and maybe more than perhaps, not in the way you want to be helped. Well, what's your choice then? Well, we would say, well, if God doesn't want to help me the way I want to be helped, then I don't want God's help. Now, we wouldn't say it that bluntly, but that's basically what we would be saying. To which Jesus says, well, that's a choice you have to make. But the story is really about the avenues of grace and the fact that we actually do. We believe in a God that can use anybody at any time to communicate grace to us. One of the questions that would emerge from that then is, how many times do you suppose in the course of one day we miss the grace of God because it didn't come in the right form? It didn't come with the right person. It didn't come with the ones we have predetermined are suitable and are not suitable. So this is not really just a feel-good story about helping your neighbor. And Luke is basically, he's got something there. He understands it pretty well. Which of these three do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers, the one who showed him mercy? Well, that's right. And Luke is on the way there, although he probably could be pushed a little further if we could to see what's his. But it's not simply the happy story that we think of so much when we think of the Good Samaritan, and you too should be a Good Samaritan. Now, this kind of a story at the time of Jesus, in his place, in his culture, would have been very upsetting to people. His own Jewish officials, religious officials, would just shake their head at him as he talked like this, and they'd begin to say, you know, talking like this is pretty dangerous. You shouldn't really do that. But nonetheless, that's how that story works. Now, there's an interesting story that follows it. And if you'd say, this story about Martha and Mary, which in my book comes right after the Good Samaritan, how does that fit in there? Well, Luke might say, well, you know, I don't know. Well, I like the story. I couldn't find any place else that I thought it fit real well, so I just put it here. So it doesn't necessarily fit in the context, but it's a good story anyway. And here again, everybody thinks they know what this story means. The story of Martha and Mary. Martha we use as a compulsive person. We beat up on her because she is that person that we don't like. Always busy, always showing us we're not doing enough. They're doing lots. Mary, on the other hand, in my tradition, the old monastic tradition, the old monks said, well, Mary is a sign of contemplation, and Martha is a sign of overwork, and God likes the person who sits at the feet of Jesus because that's what monks are supposed to do, and they don't have to be busy all the time like Martha has to do. Well, those monks needed something else to do. That's probably not it. If you were a person living at the time of Jesus, and if you were a man especially, you would know there's protocol for when you visit other people in their houses, in their homes. When you go to a place, if I went to a place, I know that I could go there, I could ring them up, tell them I'm here, they'd answer the door, the tent, And if there was a man of the house, he would answer. He would meet me at the door. I probably would know him, that's why I'm there. He would invite me into what is called the outer tent. We go into the outer tent, and he would tell his wife that she was to bring refreshments to us. She would know that. That'd be no problem. She would do that. She'd bring us the refreshments, but she would never go in the outer tent. Women did not go in the outer tent when men were there. They didn't go in there any time. Now, that's not the way necessarily we do it today, but this is not a story about how we do it today. It's how they did it then. And that was part of their cultural understanding. If there was no man of the house, for whatever reason, he was gone, or there wasn't one, or it wasn't, then the woman, the wife, would answer the door. She would tell me, such and such is not here. She might tell me, but he'll be back in a little while, or he's going to be gone for a long time. If they're going to be back for a little while, she might say, I can bring you refreshments. I would like that if you would stay for refreshments. But I would know automatically that that means I will go into the outer tent by myself. She will bring refreshments, put them at the door of the outer tent. She won't come in. I would not expect, I'd be shocked if she came in. I would not expect her. And then I can do what I want. I can eat or drink, have refreshments, and move on. And that would be it. Everybody knew that. Jesus knows that. Everybody in that culture knew that's how we do it. That's what our laws of hospitality are. Now, as they went on their way, meaning Jesus and his group are on their way to Jerusalem, while they were on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Exactly what's supposed to be. Apparently there's no man here. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. Of course, we would know immediately that is not supposed to happen. She is not supposed to be in that tent. She's taken the role, she's assumed the position of a disciple. She's sitting at the feet of the Master. And that is not what is allowed at all. Martha knows this. Everybody knows this. Mary knows this. So does Jesus. But there she is, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. Well, this is all code. What you hear and what it really means are two different things. Martha is upset because her sister is violating social customs. The most important social custom that she's violating is she has assumed the position of the man of the house. You don't do that. Women don't assume the role of the man of the house. Men did not do women's work. It was important work, but men had what they did and women had what they did. And you did not mess that up at all. But Mary has really done it big time, and Martha knows that. Martha's goal now is how can we save face? What Mary has done is considered to be very shameful. Is there some way we can save this event and get Jesus on his way and pretend like it never happened? But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. No, she was distracted by her sister. So, she came to Jesus and asked, really she's telling him, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. Now that's all code for, hey, you know and I know this is wrong. You know and I know that we have to do something about this. welcome. So, here she is. What's she going to do? She's expecting, now that she's called his attention to what this is, maybe something happened and he slipped up, or who knows, but anyway, here's an opportunity. Tell her to get out of there and back here where she belongs. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. And Martha would expect that Jesus would understand that and do that. But the Lord answered her. And here's the kicker. Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. No, I'm worried and distracted by one thing. My sister, who's out there sitting at your feet. You are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Exactly, one thing. Get her out of there. Just one thing. You know this and I know this. Mary, and this is Jesus talking, Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Well, that's the end of the story as we have it. But you can imagine that'd be devastating for Martha. How on earth could Jesus say such a thing? How could he say it? Mary has chosen the better part, violating social custom, assuming the position of the man of the house, which will not be taken away from her. Every Jew in that area would have said, boy, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? But once again, the story as we normally tell it has a different way of looking at it. You know, Martha is too busy, and so on and so on. Luke probably wants to use this story to talk about the necessity of having prayer, and to do prayer, and to be regular at prayer, and that no one should ever be excluded from having access to the teachings of Jesus, be in social custom or whatnot. Anybody who wants to sit at the feet of the Lord should be able to. To which, in the custom of Jesus, I would have said, no, that's not true. Only those who are in conjunction with what we believe socially, that's how that should work. Not breaking those barriers, those boundaries. Jesus is all the time breaking social boundaries. This is one of the reasons why people got so upset with him. His own people got upset with him because he would always, take these boundaries that we say are sacred. He would say, well, they can be if they work, but this is not God speaking, this is you speaking. And not all of your customary things are suitable. But we would say, oh, yes, they are, because they're ours. And that's the way it's going to be. Well, you keep banging about that, you keep talking like that, they're going to come after you eventually. They're going to get tired of you poking these holes in these sacred ideas that they have. Same with us. Once again, our own social customs, we think, come from God and should not be violated. And yet if Jesus would come into our midst and say, no, these boundaries really don't count anymore, and anybody who wants to have access to the teachings of Jesus should, well, that's not we've got some very strict rules and regulations about who can do what, when, where, and where, and there are people who spend most of their life spying to make sure it all gets done. But that's kind of a waste of time, especially when you see these stories. It's a good story. You can see why Luke would like it. He'd put it in there. I don't know if it comes right after the Good Samaritan or not, but nonetheless, it's a challenging story. You might want to think a bit about today, about the boundaries we observe, about how strict they are. About the avenues of grace, you might want to be a little more open. You might have an opportunity today, somebody, you won't like them, you won't think they could, but somebody might pop up and have a little something to say, rather than just dismiss them, throw them out or whatnot. You might want to say, I wonder if this could be an avenue of grace. And then before immediately say, no, it couldn't. Say, well, I'll think about it a little more. Maybe I'll try to pry myself open just a little bit more. Stories of faith, they're not only interesting, but they're challenging. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.